Hey, hope you're doing well. Andy here from Drive Steady, and in this video I'm reviewing a Volvo S60 T8 Polestar. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Listen up. When the owner of this car approached me and started saying, let me tell you about my Volvo, one thing started popping up in my head. Volvo, practicality, simplicity, safety. But let me tell you something. This S60 Polestar is one of the most interesting and characterful cars that basically nobody knows about. And let me tell you why. It's a hybrid sedan with over 400 horsepower and almost 500 pound-feet of torque. It has gold-painted Brembo brakes, a 22-way adjustable Öhlins suspension, and of course, to add some pizzazz, gold seat belts, and all of the practicality and modern features you would expect from a Volvo. So if you're wondering what Polestar is, they're now a separate brand making all-electric cars, but they still act as the performance branch underneath Volvo. Think AMG to Mercedes and M to BMW. They've been tinkering with Volvo cars for over 2 decades, and this S60 Polestar is the latest from the Swedish company. So, is it time for you and me to start opening up to Volvo and Polestar in the performance car segment? I guess we're going to find out in this review of the Volvo S60 T8 Polestar. Alright, so let's start the review off by talking about the exterior design of this S60 Polestar. I personally think that this is a great looking car. It's actually very attractive as a sedan, and it's got all of the classic things you expect from Volvo. Simple, elegant, but given that this is the Polestar trim level, they did give it some aggressiveness to make it stand out from the other S60s. Now, I do think that this thing looks better than the competition from BMW, Audi, Lexus, and Mercedes. All right, now let me give you a couple more highlights on the front end. Starting off with this grille, it's all black except for the Volvo logo, of course. And I think it looks really nice with this white color paint. Speaking of paint, you have 4 color options in this: black, white, silver, and gray. I personally like the white the best because I think it gives it a nice contrast with the trimming on this car. Next, let's talk about the Polestar badge. The Polestar badge typically, for those of you who are familiar with Polestar and Volvo, has always been in this light blue color. But Volvo decided to go in a different direction, and now it's in white. But here it's in gold or yellow. The owner modified it to match the other gold trimming on this car. Next, let's talk about the headlights. Volvo's headlights are really cool. I like them a lot, actually. And the DRLs, or the running lights, are called Thor's hammer. And there's 2 strips, and they do look like a hammer when you look at it from far away. So I think that's really cool. There's 3 sections in the grille. Only 2 of them are functional, the one on the passenger side and the one in the center section. But overall, I do think that the design is very cool, very understated, but still somewhat aggressive. All right, so now let's move to the wheels, tires, and brakes. But before talking about those, let me touch on the suspension really quickly. So this does have that Öhlins adjustable suspension, and yes, it does have 22 levels of adjustability. One might wonder, what's the difference between level 15 and level 16, but anyway, you have 22 levels to play around with. And it actually looks pretty cool because underneath the hood, it's top strut mounted. There's this knob that you can play around with and mess around with your suspension settings. So it's nice to have that level of infinite adjustability, or 22 levels of adjustability. Now let's move to the wheels. I love the look of these wheels. They're very cool. They have a black and silver looking design. They're 19 by 8 on all four corners. An interesting thing about them, they're forged and they're 15% lighter, or have 15% less unsprung weight compared to the regular T60, and they're milled out of a solid piece of aluminum block. So some interesting stuff going on here. Now let's move inside the wheelbarrow. Let's talk about these brakes. These are ventilated 14.6-inch brakes in the front and 12.6 inches in the rear. They're Brembo brake calipers, and they do have Polestar engineered logo on them, and they're painted in gold, which is so freaking cool. I like that a lot. They match the tire stems really nicely, and there's an overall gold hint or theme in this car. Next, let's talk about the tires. They are Continental tires on all four corners. They're actually quite skinny for a performance car, 235/40/19 on all four corners, so this is a true square setup. Some might say that there is a traction issue considering that these are really skinny tires, but you'll see here in the driving portion of the review that I personally did not have any traction limitations considering a 235 section tire. All right, so now let's talk about the rear end design of the S60. And from back here, it looks good as well. There's some cars you see that they're totally unproportional design-wise from the front and the rear, but this jives and flows very nicely from front to rear. Starting off with the trunk, it does have a subtle hint of a integrated spoiler. Much like the character of this car, it's extremely understated. Next, let's move to the trunk itself. So there's actually 4 ways of opening the trunk. There's a button on the interior, there's a button on the key, you do have a comfort access pad here that you pull on, and then there's also the kicking motion that you can use to open it. Now, as far as the placement of the sensor to kick open the car or to kick open the trunk, it's actually a little off center to the left, to the driver's side, so you do have to kick it and it will open up, and you are greeted with a substantial amount of space. You can easily fit, I would say, 2 larger pieces of luggage in here and some extra additional medium pieces as well. You would not have any issues with daily drivability or moving things around. Now, as far as closing the trunk, there's a button up here that looks like a automatic closing trunk, but it's not. You actually push this button, and what it does is when you close the trunk, it automatically locks the car. So that's something interesting and unexpected. Now, a bonus feature for Volvo is that they have put a grab handle in the S60. I personally like this a lot. It's a pet peeve for me to get my fingerprints on the clean exterior paint. So I just grab this, close it, clean exterior paint. All right, now let's get a little bit closer and round out the rear end design. The taillights are really nice looking. They're basically the same as what you see as far as design goes in every other Volvo, but that's not a bad thing because they look really cool. They do have LED lights. They look good in daylight and at night. You do have another Polestar badge here, which again is modified for gold or yellow color. Then let's come straight down to the exhaust, which are painted in black. They have a black chrome finish, but they're still subtle. It's not chrome in the sense of chrome like you're thinking, so it's still understated. It does have Polestar engineered written on there. It's a dual exit design, so let's take a listen to what this thing sounds like. All right, so you had a chance to listen to the exhaust, not the most aggressive sounding thing, but anyway, let's talk about the engine now. So this is one of the more interesting things about this car is the engine or the power plant. So you have 2. Let's start off with the engine. This is a 2-liter turbocharged and supercharged a 4-cylinder engine, making a combined output of 415 horsepower and 494 pounds-feet of torque. Yes, that's right. This Volvo has almost 500 pounds-feet of torque. Now, if you're wondering what's the split as far as engine and battery power goes, the engine makes 382 horsepower and 317 pounds-feet of torque, while the electric motors contribute with an extra 87 horsepower, while the batteries contribute with an extra 87 horsepower and 177 pounds-feet of torque. This car has all-wheel drive, and the engine powers the front wheels, and the electric motors or the electric battery power the rear wheels. So it's interesting, you might want to just run it in electric mode in order to get a rear-wheel drive car. It weighs about 4,500 pounds, so it's quite heavy, but unsurprising because of the extra batteries. It gets 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds, decently fast. It has several driving modes, which I will go over here in a second. 8-speed automatic transmission, which I think is the weak link in this powertrain, and I'll talk more about that during the driving portion of the review. All right, given that this is a hybrid car or an electric car and you can run it purely on electricity, let's talk about the battery and some range and this outlet here where you use to plug it in to charge. Speaking of the batteries, 11.6 kilowatt battery with a 65 kilowatt electric motor. You can drive up to 22 miles on a full battery, just electricity, not using any gas. Speaking of the charging cable, it has a 22-foot long cable, so it's extremely practical. If you don't have easy access to a wall outlet, you can just park it far away and use your really long cable to charge it. As far as outlets go, 120 volt or 240 volt work just fine to charge this car. Then you've got the characteristics or the driving modes. So you've got three of them. You've got a pure, hybrid, and Polestar engineered. So let's start off with pure. Pure is just all electric mode. You do not use the engine, the gas-powered engine whatsoever. Then you've got hybrid, and you're basically leaving that up to the car to decide if I'm just going to use the electric engine, or I'm going to use the gas engine, or I'm going to be hybrid and I'm going to use a little bit of both. Then you've got Polestar engineered, which is the opposite, and it turns everything on all the time. You get all the power, 415 horsepower, 494 pounds-feet of torque. Now, one thing that's interesting about this car, it does have the ability to charge itself running on just gasoline. So there's a button here on the infotainment, you click that and it will charge the batteries up. When you're driving it, it will use the gasoline. You'll use more gas, of course, to charge the batteries, but it's cool if you don't have the ability to charge the batteries or you don't want to consistently be plugging it in. Then there's also a method of holding the battery charge. So again, in the infotainment, you hold a button here and it will hold the battery charge. It will not use it whatsoever. So just in case you want to save it for a certain situation. All right, so now let's talk about the interior of the S60 Polestar and a couple key words to use as far as describing this interior. It's a high quality, well put together, nicely thought out, practical, technology-filled interior. I personally don't really have many complaints about it. So let me jump into the details and I'll run through some of the positives and the negatives here. So starting off with the seat, this is a positive. This is one of the more comfortable seats that I've sat in. It does have some aggressiveness to it. The bolsters are fixed, they're not adjustable, and they're okay in holding me in, but they're still very comfortable. There is a thigh extension here or a leg extension that's electronically adjustable, so that's always nice. And then the overall material of the seat, it's really cool. It's got a cloth and a leather mixture. Now let's talk about the steering wheel. So the steering wheel is circular and does not have a flat bottom shape. It does have the multi-control buttons here that allow you to toggle through certain settings, but overall it's a nicely sized steering wheel. The paddle shifters look okay, but they're plastic and they could be better. But again, let's keep it relative or expectations set considering the price point of this car and what it's competing against. Then let's move to the gauge cluster. So you have a all digital gauge cluster. It's a 12-inch screen that allows for configuration. So you have the ability to switch through the way it looks, and also the layout changes when you switch to the driving mode. So when you're in pure pure, or when you're in hybrid, you have the speedometer to the left, and you also have the efficiency meter, let's call it, to the right. But then when you switch to the Polestar mode, the efficiency stuff becomes less highlighted and you get a tachometer on the right side. Then you move up to the heads-up display. The heads-up display is actually very simple in this car, and I like it for that. I don't like overly complicated heads-up displays because in general, I personally don't like head-up displays. This does not impede your vision. It's kind of like tucked away. You do have the ability to move it around if you like. Then let's move up to the roof here. You have a standard panoramic sunroof, which is always nice. It makes the interior a little bit more airy and a little bit more roomy, so that's always nice to see. So now let's move to the infotainment screen. It is a vertically mounted screen, tablet style, as opposed to horizontally. It is touch screen. Volvo calls the software Sensus, but as far as the screen goes, the physical aspect of it, it is a nice size. The visibility is good. It doesn't glare too much in the sun. It is a touch screen, as I mentioned, so not really, nothing to really complain about there. Now let's jump into the software itself. This is a very intuitive software. I jumped in and the owner kind of gave me like a 30-second overview, and then after playing around with it for like a minute or 2 minutes, I immediately knew where everything was. There's basically 3 screens. There's a main screen here that gives you your shortcuts for your navigation, your audio, your radio, and your phone, and the last setting you're in. You can swipe to the right or to the left. If you swipe to the right, you have a couple more app laid out things here. The cool one is the driver performance, which allows you to see where the battery power is, or if the engine is charging the battery. So that looks really cool when you're driving. I constantly found myself looking at it, and you really shouldn't. But that's a really cool looking screen. The nice thing is when you're kind of lost in some of these menus, there's a physical home button. You can click that and it will take you back to that main screen. You swipe to the right, and this is where you see all of your safety features. The 2 buttons I was showing you earlier to hold the battery and to charge the battery while you're only using gas. And then you have all the safety features which are laid out here, and it's really nice. You don't have to go digging through a bunch of menus to turn certain things around. BMW does this well. They have the safety ring or the button. You just click that and it turns all the stuff off. But Volvo does it nice here as well. They give you the ability to individually turn things off just at the click of a button. So overall, I do like this infotainment screen a lot. It's touch screen, it doesn't lag, the graphics are crisp, it's easy to get used to. So overall, it's just really good. Then let's stay inside the infotainment system, because one thing you'll notice here is that there's a severe lack of buttons in this Volvo. Everything is mostly integrated into the screen, and that includes your heated seat function and your climate controls. So the climate controls are all touch screen. It's also, again, very intuitive. You just click on it and then you choose your temperature, or if you want to turn it off, you just click in the center section here and you turn it off, or you turn up your fan speed, whatever you want. It's actually really easy to use. Then you have a row of buttons down here to control your hazards, your volume, and to skip the track. But again, overall lack of buttons on the interior. Now let's come to a couple weak points of this interior. The first thing, the transmission selector. The way it operates is funny or weird, whatever you want to call it. It's not intuitive, counter to all the intuitiveness in this car. So let me explain. The way you operate the shifter, you put your foot on the brake, you pull it down once, you would expect to be in drive, but you're not, you're in neutral. So whether you're going into drive or whether you're going into reverse, you have to tug on this selector twice. So you pull it down once and it'll put you in neutral, you pull it down again and it'll put you in drive. Opposite way, you push it up once, it'll put you in neutral, you push it up again, it'll put you in reverse, and then there's a button for P. In every other car that I've driven, if you pull it down aggressively, it just puts you in drive. You push it up aggressively, it puts you in reverse. I think this is something that needs to improve. But anyway, that's one weak point. Then coming down, let's talk about the way you turn the car on. It's actually a really cool looking piece. You twist it to the right to stop, you twist it again to the right to turn it off. The drive mode selector is actually really cool. It's got a nice looking finish to it and it feels good when you're toggling it up and down. Now coming to another weakness here in the interior, and it's the center storage section here. It's extremely limited, and let me explain why. It's because there's a bunch of batteries and a bunch of thick componentry for the electric motor in the rear running through the center of the car, so that's sacrificing the center storage area here. So details, it's very small, it's not deep, it's okay as far as the opening goes. You can't really fit a cell phone in here. Of course, most modern cell phones are now pretty big, but Volvo does give you this option of kind of putting your cell phone in this little tray here, but overall it's lacking as far as center storage section goes. All right, now because this is a sedan, let's talk about the rear seats really quickly. And I'm sitting behind myself. You can see that I have plenty of leg room here, no concerns about the leg room. I do feel like it would be a tight fit if you put 3 people in here. I'm practically occupying a little bit of the center area here, and putting 3 people in here or 3 people similar to my body size would kind of be a tight squeeze. 2 people would not be an issue. Now, one cool thing is you also have the gold seat belts back here, which is a really cool touch. Typically what you see is seat belts of a different color just in the front seat, but Volvo is not skipping out on you. They're giving you these gold trim seats back here as well. But overall thoughts on the interior itself, really nicely put together. Like I mentioned earlier on, the quality is good. The back seat is good for 4 people. For 5 people, it's a squeeze. Unless you're in a pinch, you could probably use it. But again, it's a nice back seat with a decent amount of legroom. 2 shortcomings are the transmission selector or the gear selector and the center storage area. And of course, that's by nature of the battery, so I can't really ding it there, but overall still a weakness. So now let's move to the driving portion of the review. All right, so now the driving portion of the review, but as always, before getting started, this is what the key looks like. And this is actually a really nice key. The owner modified it and put on this wooden inlay. I'm not sure exactly what it looks like without this, but the key is actually a really nice key, surprisingly. One thing I wish it had a little bit more weight, but otherwise, very impressed with the key, surprisingly. Now, let me talk about the visibility and some of the other safety features and the price. So visibility is really good out front. The hood does not bother me whatsoever. When I look over my shoulders, I have no blind spots on either side. I do have blind spot monitoring, and I do have a rear view camera. I have a front view camera. Just in general, the camera system in this car is really good. I also have a 360-degree camera, which is fantastic. The resolution for the cameras are really good and pretty much up to standard with what you would expect as far as clarity and sharpness in today's day and age. Otherwise, you have lane keep assist. You also have self-driving, so automated cruise control, which I'll demonstrate during the driving portion of the review. It was so interesting to feel that for the first time, and I'll try and describe it during the driving portion here in a second. Otherwise, pricing. Now, this is a base price of $66,000. The paint is a $600 option, but there aren't really many other options beyond that. This is a very limited car. In the 2019 model year, they made about 20 of them. And I tried looking on Auto Trader and cars.com and all the other car websites, and I basically found like 4 or 5 for sale. So they're very limited. But the pricing, where it falls, it's about $3,000 less than a M3, and it is $4,000 more than a mostly loaded BMW M3 40i. It's practically the same price as a Audi S4. So that's pretty much the pricing. Now let's go ahead and turn this thing on and go for a drive. All right, so foot on the brake, twist it once to the right, and it's telling me that the car is on, even though I don't hear the engine or anything like that. But anyway, we should get used to that because that's where we're heading. No more engine noise once our gasoline-powered engines are gone. Anyways, so let me go ahead and put this in Polestar engineering mode, which like I mentioned, turns the engine on and uses the full capacity of the batteries. And let's go ahead and see how this thing goes. So pull it down once, put it in neutral, pull it down twice, put it in drive. So that's one of the more annoying things about this car. Let me make sure I'm not saving any battery or holding it or charging while I'm driving, and I'm not. So let's go ahead and go for it. And I'm going to put it in paddle shifting mode because the transmission isn't very happy to hold the gear. When you leave it in automatic mode, it'll shift prior to redline when you're really hammering it, which is very strange. But anyway, I'm going to put it in M1. This car does not have any launch control, does not have anything to make your acceleration better. So I'm going to put it in D1 and go ahead and just launch it. So foot on the floor. See, it just shifted again by itself. It doesn't even go all the way to redline, which is 6,500. So it's very strange, this transmission. I'll talk about it here a little bit more in a second, but let me get a couple more pulls here. But it's very interesting. It doesn't listen to you. Like I'm in manual shifting mode, and it won't shift when I tell it to. It just automatically shifts on its own. It won't listen to what I have to say, unfortunately. So let me go ahead and try it again. D1, foot on the floor. See, it just automatically shifts at 6,000 RPM. It's so strange. Anyway, so Volvo, get your transmission straight. Let it listen to me. But as far as the speed goes, it's pretty quick. It's definitely not going to knock your socks off as far as speed goes, but it's a quick car. I'm seeing a pretty decent number here. Yeah, it's pretty quick. There's definitely a lag there with the supercharger and the turbocharger and the batteries and all this stuff trying to work together to give you the most efficient acceleration, and you can definitely feel that. It doesn't feel like a traditional gas-powered engine where you've got a linear power band like you do in a naturally aspirated car or like a turbo shove. So now let me talk a little bit more about this transmission. The paddles are okay. It is lazy and it does lag. When the shift happens, I don't know if it's with the transmission or if it's with the gauge cluster, but it seems like there's definitely a lag when it's shifting and when I'm accelerating, and it just feels kind of weird. So that, I would say, is the weakest thing about this car, is the transmission. It needs like a ZF transmission or something a little bit more modern and responsive. The speed is good, but I don't know, I feel like there's something lacking about this transmission. Let me go ahead and turn around and tell you about the suspension. The suspension is actually very, very nice. The owner of this car has tuned it to the factory setting. It's level 6 in the front and level 9 in the rear. And it's a very comfortable riding car. I have heard that when you turn it up all the way, it does get very bone-jarringly stiff, but in this factory setting, the way this owner has it set is very, very nice. Now, the brake pedal. The brake pedal is extremely weird. It's another one of the flaws as far as the driving dynamics go. So you really have to push down on the pedal in order to get braking power. The top is kind of squishy, and then once you get to about a quarter's way down into the pedal, you really start feeling it, and then you really got to push about halfway down the pedal to get that feel. And it's very, very interesting because when you drive it in Polestar mode, it feels different than when you drive it in all-electric mode. In all-electric mode, the pedal seems a little bit more sensitive, while you're in Polestar mode, it feels like you really got to push it in a little bit more. So I found that to be very, very interesting. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the daily drivability topic. So this is an excellent, excellent, excellent daily driver. The seats are extremely comfortable. The engine, when you're driving it normally, is silky smooth. The electric range, 22 miles, is good for somebody who has a short commute to and from work. So no issues there. The infotainment system is very good. The seats are actually very comfortable. And as I'm about to display here, I'm about to get onto the highway. So I want to show you guys how this autopilot, or I don't know what Volvo calls it, but it basically drives on its own when you enable cruise control. It'll speed up and slow down and all this stuff. Let me merge onto the freeway, and of course it's in the middle of the day, and I've got a lot of traffic around me. But anyway, so let me go ahead and see if I could enable the cruise control and set it at, what is this, 30 miles an hour. I have to swipe to the right and pilot assist. There we go. So the steering wheel is green. I'm going to take my hands off the wheel and it's just driving. This is the weirdest thing, I swear. It was so weird for me to do this. It is, look, it's steering on its own. It's doing its thing. It's just going. So I'm going to speed up a little bit. And if you want to stop the pilot, which I'm not, I'm just speeding up a little bit. And I'm going to let it go again. Steers me back into my lane. It's a little finicky. The owner tells me it does need 2 clear lines. And I don't know if it's confusing this yellow line with the white line. But let me take my foot off the brake, gas again, and look at this thing. I swear this was the most surreal thing. I couldn't believe that this car was basically driving itself. So apply steering. And what it does, it makes you apply steering every 15 seconds. So it'll drive on its own as long as you keep your hands on the wheel and you tell it that you're awake and you're not sleeping. But this is so cool. It just basically drives on its own. I don't have to do anything. I just sit here and I pay attention. I don't have to put my foot on the brake. I don't have to accelerate. I don't have to do anything. It just drives on its own, and it's unbelievable. I don't know what to think about it, but the owner tells me he does it all the time and he loves it. But anyway, this is another reason why this car is an excellent daily driver. You can sit in traffic. It just goes on its own, and you don't have to worry about anything. It just goes. And it's so unbelievable how far technology has come nowadays, where I don't even have to drive anymore in my car. So apply steering, there it goes. So every 15 seconds it reminds me I got to put my hand on the wheel and tell it that I'm still awake. But I'm telling you, this car is a sweet car. Now, as it's driving me here, let me give you my overall thoughts. Like I said, this is a great car. It does have some flaws. The transmission isn't the best. The experience of it, there are some drawbacks. I do wish it had a 6-cylinder engine. That would have made this car much better. I feel like the engine itself is missing some character. It would benefit from a 6-cylinder engine. Even if it had the same horsepower, I wish it had a 6-cylinder. But anyway, that's another thing. Let me get out of... So when I'm changing lanes, it actually allows me to change the lane, and then it automatically engages. Actually, I put my foot on the brake. So let me go ahead and re-engage it again. Okay, so yeah, those are some of the weak points. Overall, it's a great car. It does have a very comfortable interior. It's well put together, and the back seats are very good. So not really much to complain. It also looks very nice. Like I said in the beginning of the video, I think this car looks much better than the BMW, Audi, Mercedes, Lexus competition. So would I buy this car as a daily driver? Yes, absolutely I would. As far as a performance car, I think this is more along the lines of an M340i and a C43 rather than a C63 or an M3. It isn't to that level of performance, but it does strike a decent balance between something that is extremely fast and something that is actually dull. So it's a nice balance here, and I see what Volvo is trying to do. So that's pretty much all I've got. If you have any other questions for me, please make sure to send me a comment down below, or just send me a DM on Instagram at Drive Steady. But thank you for watching this video. Until next time, drive steady.